When 12-year-old Lucas Bennett raised his hand to solve a 200-year-old math problem, the entire class erupted in laughter. His arrogant professor had just called it impossible. But this quiet scholarship kid wasn't joking. Lucas Bennett sat in the back row of Westfield Academy's lecture hall, his worn notebook open to equations that would have impressed most professors. But nobody at Westfield was impressed by Lucas. Not the students in designer clothes, not the faculty who viewed scholarship kids as charity cases, and certainly not Professor Victor Sterling. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling announced, his voice dripping with confidence, "what you see is the Goldstone conjecture. For 200 years, the greatest mathematical minds have attempted to solve this problem. Euler couldn't crack it. Gauss gave up. Even MIT has declared it unsolvable." Lucas looked down at his notebook. He'd seen this problem before, 3 months ago, in a library book so old the pages crumbled when he turned them. While his classmates spent their evenings at country clubs and yacht parties, Lucas spent his nights in the public library, the only place in town with heating he didn't have to pay for. That's where he'd found it. That's where everything changed. "Now," Sterling continued, turning to face the class with a smirk that Lucas had learned to hate, "I want you all to understand something fundamental about mathematics. There are problems in this world that are beyond human capability. Problems that exist not to be solved, but to humble us, to remind us of our limitations." In the front row, Madison Prescott raised her hand. "Professor, if it's impossible, why show it to us?" Sterling smiled. "Because true education isn't just learning what we can do. It's learning what we cannot do. Some of you will go to Harvard, Princeton, Stanford. You'll earn PhDs, win awards, but you'll never solve this problem. No one will." Lucas felt his jaw tighten. He'd heard this before. The guidance counselor who suggested community college. The teacher who said kids from his neighborhood should focus on practical skills. The moments where someone looked at his second-hand clothes and decided his potential. "Professor," Lucas said, his voice quiet. The hall fell silent. Heads turned. "Yes, Mr. Bennett?" Sterling's tone could have frozen water. "I don't have a question, sir. I have a solution." Laughter erupted. Madison exchanged glances with her friend Jennifer, both covering their mouths. Brandon Hutchins actually stood and gave Lucas mock applause. "Everyone, please," Sterling said, smiling. "Mr. Bennett has a solution to a problem that has stumped the greatest minds in history. Clearly, we should all pay attention." More laughter. Lucas's hands trembled, but he kept them flat on his desk. His father's voice echoed, "Don't let them see you shake, son." "I'm serious," Lucas said louder. "I solved it 3 months ago." Sterling's smile faded. He walked down the aisle until he stood directly before Lucas's desk. "You solved it," Sterling repeated slowly. "The Goldstone conjecture. A problem from 1823. A problem that has defeated Fields Medal winners. You, a 12-year-old scholarship student, solved it. In 3 months." "I didn't say it was easy," Lucas replied, meeting his eyes. "I said I solved it." The silence was absolute. Everyone was watching. Sterling straightened, his expression shifting to pity. "Very well, Mr. Bennett. Come up here and show us this miraculous solution." Lucas stood up, his cheap chair scraping against the floor with a sound that seemed to echo forever. He picked up his notebook, not the neat leather-bound notebooks the other students used, but a composition book with a torn cover that he'd bought for 50 cents at a garage sale, and walked to the front of the room. Every step felt like walking through water. He could feel their eyes on him, could hear the whispers that weren't quite whispers. "This is going to be hilarious. Someone record this. Poor kid actually thinks he's smart." When he reached the blackboard, Lucas turned to face the class. 73 students, all of them older than him, all of them richer than him, all of them absolutely certain he was about to humiliate himself. Behind them, through the large windows, Lucas could see the Westfield Academy campus, perfectly manicured lawns, marble fountains, buildings that looked more like palaces than schools. This was their world. He was just visiting. Sterling handed him chalk, stepping back and crossing his arms. "The floor is yours, Mr. Bennett." Lucas took the chalk. His hand shook, but his father's voice returned. "Your mother used to shake before surgery. Steady hands are overrated, son. Steady minds matter." He turned to the blackboard and began to write. The first equation flowed from his chalk like water. then the second, then the third. He wasn't thinking about the laughter anymore, or the stares, or the fact that his entire future at this school probably depended on the next few minutes. He was thinking about the numbers, the beautiful, logical progression that had kept him awake for 3 months, that had consumed every spare moment between his job at the grocery store and his late-night study sessions. The chalk clicked against the board in a steady rhythm. Lucas filled one section, then moved to another, his handwriting small and precise, because he knew he'd need every inch of space. He wrote out the initial premise, the variable substitutions, the transformation that everyone had missed because they'd been looking at the problem from the wrong angle. Behind him, the laughter had stopped. He could feel the change in the room, like the air pressure shifting before a storm. He didn't turn around. Couldn't turn around. He was in the flow now, that magical state where time seemed to slow down and speed up simultaneously, where everything except the problem itself faded away. He moved to the third section of the board. The proof was building now, each line supporting the next, the logic ironclad. This was the part that had taken him the longest to figure out. The middle section where intuition met rigor, where the creative leap had to be backed up with mathematical certainty. His hand cramped. He switched the chalk to his other hand and kept writing. The equations grew more complex, layers of notation that would have looked like gibberish to most people, but told a story to those who could read it. A story about patterns and relationships, about how sometimes the answer to an impossible question was to prove that the question itself was flawed. Finally, Lucas reached the conclusion, the final transformation, the one that brought everything full circle. He wrote it out carefully, double-checking each symbol, making sure there were no gaps in the logic. Then he stepped back and looked at what he'd created. The blackboard was covered, every inch filled with 3 months of work. Lucas turned around. The silence was different now. This was shock. Madison's mouth hung open. Brandon had stopped smiling. Even Jennifer was leaning forward. Professor Sterling stood frozen, his eyes moving across the blackboard in rapid jerks, his lips moving slightly as he traced through the logic. Lucas watched as the professor's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, concentration, disbelief, and finally, something that looked almost like horror. "This is..." Sterling's voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. "This is obviously wrong. It has to be wrong. You can't..." But he didn't finish the sentence. Instead, he walked up to the blackboard, so close that his nose was almost touching Lucas's equations. He traced one line with his finger, then another, his breathing getting faster. "Where did you get this?" Sterling demanded, spinning around to face Lucas. "Where did you copy this from? Which textbook? Which paper?" "I didn't copy it," Lucas said quietly. "I solved it." "Impossible!" Sterling's voice echoed off the walls. "A 12-year-old doesn't solve a 200-year-old problem. It doesn't happen. It can't happen. You must have found this somewhere, memorized it, thought you could impress us all with..." "Professor Sterling," a voice called from the back of the room. Everyone turned. Ms. Emily Ward, the young physics teacher, stood in the doorway. Lucas had only met her once, briefly, when she'd helped him find the library on his first day. She looked different from the other teachers, younger, less polished, like she actually cared about teaching instead of just collecting a paycheck from wealthy parents. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Ms. Ward said, walking in, her eyes fixed on the blackboard. "Is that the Goldstone conjecture?" "It's a fraud," Sterling snapped. The boy copied it. Ms. Ward walked closer to the board, her eyes scanning the equations with an intensity that made Lucas's heart race. She was really reading it, really following the logic, not just looking for mistakes, but understanding it. "Professor Sterling," she said slowly, "I don't think he copied this. The notation is unconventional. The approach is completely original. This is..." She turned to look at Lucas, her eyes wide. "Did you really solve this yourself?" Lucas nodded, not trusting his voice. Ms. Ward turned back to the board, pulling out her phone and taking pictures of each section. "This is remarkable. Absolutely remarkable. The transformation here in the middle section, that's genius. Pure genius. No one's ever approached it from that angle before." "It's wrong," Sterling insisted, but his voice had lost its certainty. "It has to be wrong. There's a mistake somewhere. There has to be." "Then find it," Ms. Ward challenged. Show us where he made his mistake. Professor Sterling stared at the board, his jaw working, his hands clenching and unclenching. The seconds stretched into minutes. The students began whispering again, but different whispers now. Confused whispers. Uncertain whispers. Finally, Sterling turned to face the class, his face red, his voice tight. Class dismissed. Everyone out. Now. Nobody moved. I said out. The students scrambled for their bags, filing out of the lecture hall in a confused mass. But they kept looking back, stealing glances at the blackboard, at Lucas, at Professor Sterling's furious face. Miss Ward didn't move. She stayed by the blackboard, her phone still out, still taking pictures. When the last student had left, Sterling turned to Lucas. You, he said, his voice low and dangerous, are in serious trouble, young man. Academic fraud is grounds for immediate expulsion. I don't know how you did this, whether you hacked into a university database or paid someone to do your homework, but I will find out. Do you understand me? Victor, Ms. Ward said softly. I really don't think— Stay out of this, Emily, Sterling snapped. This doesn't concern you. Actually, Ms. Ward replied, her voice still calm but with steel underneath, I think it concerns everyone. Because if this solution is correct, and I believe it is, then this young man just made mathematical history, and you're threatening to expel him for it. Sterling's face went from red to purple. Get out, he told Lucas. Get out of my classroom, and don't come back until you're ready to confess what you really did. Lucas picked up his notebook with shaking hands and walked toward the door. As he passed Ms. Ward, she touched his shoulder gently. Wait for me outside, she whispered. Don't go anywhere. This isn't over. Lucas nodded and walked out into the hallway, his legs barely holding him up. Behind him, he could hear Professor Sterling and Ms. Ward beginning to argue, their voices rising and falling like waves. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, his notebook clutched to his chest, his whole body trembling. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. He'd shown them the solution. But as he sat there in the empty hallway of Westfield Academy, listening to the sounds of argument coming from the lecture hall, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part was just beginning. The door burst open. Ms. Ward stepped out, expression determined. Lucas, we need to talk to Dr. Brooks. Right now. Who's Dr. Brooks? The director of Westfield Academy, Ms. Ward replied, offering her hand. And possibly the only person in this school with enough power to protect you. Lucas took her hand and stood. Through the door he could see Sterling at the blackboard, frantically checking equations. What is about to happen? Lucas asked. Ms. Ward looked at him and smiled. Everything, Lucas. Absolutely everything. The walk to Dr. Brooks's office felt like a funeral march. Students stared as they passed. Word was spreading. The scholarship kid who claimed he solved the impossible problem. Lucas kept his eyes forward, notebook pressed against his chest. Had he made a terrible mistake? Lucas, Ms. Ward said, as they climbed the grand staircase. Dr. Brooks will want proof. Do you have your work? Your notes? Lucas nodded, opening his notebook. Pages filled with months of calculations, scratch work, failed attempts. Coffee stains where he'd fallen asleep at the library. Eraser marks from caught mistakes. Ms. Ward flipped through pages, eyes wide. You can see your thinking evolve. The false starts, the breakthrough moment. She looked up. This is authentic genius. It's just math, Lucas said quietly. No, Ms. Ward replied. It's never just math. Not when it changes everything. The administrative wing looked more like a luxury hotel. Dark wood paneling, oil paintings, crystal chandeliers. The receptionist looked up with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Ms. Ward, I don't believe you have an appointment. This is an emergency, Patricia. We need to see Dr. Brooks immediately. Patricia's eyes drifted to Lucas, taking in his second-hand clothes. Dr. Brooks is very busy. Perhaps if you schedule— Patricia. Ms. Ward's voice was steel. This student may have just solved one of mathematics' most famous problems. Dr. Brooks will want to see him, now. The receptionist's eyebrows rose. She picked up her phone. Dr. Brooks, Ms. Ward is here. She says it's urgent. A pause. Yes, sir. She gestured toward the oak door. He'll see you. Doctor. Brooks's office was intimidating. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, massive mahogany desk, windows overlooking the campus. Behind the desk hung degrees from Harvard, Oxford, MIT. Dr. Brooks was silver-haired, 60s, wearing an expensive suit. He stood as they entered. "Ms. Ward, what's this urgent matter?" "Dr. Brooks, this is Lucas Bennett, one of our scholarship students. In Professor Sterling's class today, he presented a complete solution to the Goldstone conjecture." Absolute silence. Dr. Brooks sat down slowly, gesturing for them to sit. The Goldstone conjecture, a problem from 1823 that has defeated the finest mathematical minds. He looked at Lucas. "You're telling me a 12-year-old solved it?" "Yes, sir." "Show me." Lucas opened his notebook and placed it on the desk. Dr. Brooks pulled it closer, his eyes scanning the first page, then the second, then flipping faster through the months of work. His expression shifted, skepticism melting into concentration, concentration deepening into something that looked like disbelief. "Where did you learn this notation?" Dr. Brooks asked, pointing to a particular transformation. "I didn't learn it anywhere," Lucas replied. "I needed a way to represent the relationship between the variables that the standard notation couldn't capture. So I made up my own." Dr. Brooks looked up sharply. "You invented your own mathematical notation?" "It was the only way to see the pattern." Dr. Brooks returned to the notebook, his finger tracing Lucas's work line by line. Minutes passed. The only sound was the ticking of an antique clock on the bookshelf and the whisper of pages turning. Ms. Ward caught Lucas's eye and gave him a small, encouraging nod. Finally, Dr. Brooks closed the notebook and leaned back in his chair. He took off his glasses, cleaned them with a cloth from his pocket, put them back on. When he spoke, his voice was different, softer, almost awed. "Mr. Bennett, I have been the director of this academy for 23 years. I have seen thousands of students pass through these halls, brilliant students, gifted students, students who went on to change the world." He paused. "But I have never seen anything like this." Lucas felt something loosen in his chest. "However," Dr. Brooks continued, and the tightness returned, "we have a significant problem. Professor Sterling has already filed a formal complaint accusing you of academic fraud. He claims there is no possible way you could have solved this problem legitimately. He's demanding an immediate investigation, and pending its results, your suspension from Westfield Academy." The room tilted. Suspension. Expelled. Everything Lucas had worked for, everything his father had sacrificed to get him here, gone. "That's ridiculous," Ms. Ward said, her voice sharp. "The evidence is right there in his notebook. You can see the progression of his thinking. This isn't something he copied. This is original work." "I agree," Dr. Brooks said. "But Professor Sterling is a tenured faculty member with significant influence on our board of trustees. Several board members are his former students. They respect his judgment. If he says this is fraud, they'll listen." "So what do we do?" Ms. Ward asked. Dr. Brooks was quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled in front of his face. Then he reached for his phone. "Patricia, please get me Professor Chen at MIT." "Yes, the mathematics department. Tell her it's urgent." He hung up and looked at Lucas. "Professor Helen Chen is one of the world's leading experts in abstract mathematics. She was actually working on the Goldstone conjecture herself for several years before she concluded it was unsolvable. If anyone can verify your solution, she can." The phone rang. Dr. Brooks picked it up. "Helen? Harrison Brooks at Westfield Academy. I need your help with something extraordinary." He paused, listening. "I know how this is going to sound, but I need you to trust me. I'm sending you photographs of what appears to be a complete solution to the Goldstone conjecture. I need you to verify it." Another pause. "Helen, the solution was created by a 12-year-old boy." Lucas couldn't hear Professor Chen's response, but Dr. Brooks's expression suggested she was skeptical. "I'm sending the images now. Call me back as soon as you've reviewed them." He hung up and turned to Ms. Ward. "Send her the photos you took in the classroom." Ms. Ward quickly pulled out her phone and began forwarding the images. Lucas watched the progress bar crawl across the screen, each second feeling like an hour. Everything depended on this. A stranger hundreds of miles away would decide his fate based on photographs of a blackboard. "While we wait," Dr. Brooks said, "I need to understand something, Lucas. Why? Why did you even attempt this problem? You must have known it was considered impossible." Lucas thought about the question, about those long nights in the library, about the beauty of the numbers, about the way the world fell away when he was deep in a problem, about how math was the one place where his father's paycheck didn't matter, where his address didn't matter, where he could be judged purely on the clarity of his thinking. Because impossible isn't a mathematical term, Lucas said finally. Impossible is what people say when they haven't found the answer yet. And because, he hesitated, then continued, because everyone told me what I couldn't do. My whole life people have been telling me what I can't do because of where I'm from. I wanted to prove them wrong. Dr. Brooks nodded slowly. And you have, Mr. Bennett. Whether anyone wants to admit it or not, you have. The phone rang. Dr. Brooks answered it immediately. Helen? Lucas watched the director's face as he listened. Dr. Brooks's expression went through a transformation, concentration, surprise, shock, and finally, something that looked like wonder. You're certain? Dr. Brooks asked. Absolutely certain? A pause. Yes, I understand. Thank you, Helen. I'll be in touch. He hung up and looked at Lucas and Ms. Ward. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. Professor Chen has confirmed it. The solution is correct. Not only correct, but brilliant. She said the approach Lucas took was so elegant, so innovative, that she's angry at herself for not seeing it. She wants to meet you, Lucas. She wants to help you publish this. She said, Dr. Brooks paused, shaking his head in disbelief. She said you're going to change the field of mathematics. Ms. Ward let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. She reached over and squeezed Lucas's shoulder. You did it. You actually did it. But Lucas was looking at Dr. Brooks, who had picked up his phone again, his expression hardening. Patricia, please inform Professor Sterling that I need to see him in my office. Immediately. Yes, it's about Mr. Bennett. No, he shouldn't wait. He hung up and looked at Lucas. This isn't over, I'm afraid. Sterling won't back down easily. His reputation is on the line now. He publicly called you a fraud in front of 73 students. If he admits he was wrong, Dr. Brooks trailed off, but Lucas understood. If Sterling admitted he was wrong, he'd look foolish, and powerful men don't like looking foolish. What happens now? Lucas asked. Now, Doctor. Yeah, Brooks said, standing up and walking to his window, looking out over the campus. We prepare for a fight, because Professor Sterling is going to do everything in his power to discredit you. He'll question your methodology, your resources, your integrity. He'll dig into your background looking for any reason to claim you couldn't have done this alone. But I did do it alone, Lucas protested. I know, Dr. Moore, Brooks replied, turning back to face him. And that's what makes this so dangerous. Because if a 12-year-old scholarship student with no special resources or training can solve a 200-year-old problem that Sterling himself called impossible, what does that say about Sterling? About all the professors who gave up on it? About the entire academic establishment that declared it unsolvable? The door burst open without a knock. Professor Sterling stood in the doorway, his face red, his breathing heavy like he'd run up the stairs. Harrison, Sterling said, not even glancing at Lucas or Miss Ward. We need to discuss this situation immediately. That boy has committed academic fraud and needs to be expelled before this school's reputation. Sit down, Victor, Dr. Brooks said quietly. Something in his tone made Sterling pause. He looked at Dr. Brooks, then at Ms. Ward's slight smile, then at Lucas's notebook still open on the desk. What? Sterling asked, but his voice had lost its certainty. I just got off the phone with Professor Helen Chen at MIT, Dr. Brooks said. She's reviewed Lucas's solution. It's correct, Victor. Completely, brilliantly, undeniably correct. Sterling's face went from red to white. That's not possible. He didn't, Dr. Brooks interrupted. The work is original. The notation is unique. The approach is innovative. This young man just made mathematical history, and you accused him of fraud in front of an entire class. The silence that followed was deafening. Sterling stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Lucas watched the man who had humiliated him, who had called him a liar, who had threatened to destroy his future, slowly realize that he'd made a terrible mistake. Sterling began, but Dr. Brooks held up his hand. We'll discuss your situation later, Victor. Right now, we need to protect Lucas and manage this announcement properly. This is going to be national news, probably international. The youngest person ever to solve a centuries-old mathematical problem. Every media outlet in the world will want to interview him. Lucas felt dizzy. Media outlets. National news. He'd just wanted to solve a problem. He hadn't thought about what would come after. Ms. Ward must have seen his expression because she leaned close and whispered, "Breathe. Just breathe. We'll get through this together." But as Lucas looked at Sterling's face, at the anger, the humiliation, the hatred barely contained beneath a veneer of professionalism, he wondered if getting through this would be harder than solving the Goldstone conjecture itself. Because numbers were logical. Numbers made sense. Numbers played by rules. People didn't. And the look in Sterling's eyes promised that this war was far from over. The news exploded overnight. By morning, Lucas's face was everywhere. 12-year-old genius solves 200-year-old math problem. His scholarship photo appeared on news shows, blogs, social media worldwide. Lucas stared at his reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. Same brown hair, same second-hand shirt, same kid. But everything had changed. His father knocked. "Lucas?" Reporters outside, at least a dozen. Thomas Bennett stood in the hallway in his factory uniform, face showing pride mixed with worry. "What do we do?" Lucas asked. "We tell the truth. That's all we can ever do, son." When they opened the door, cameras and microphones overwhelmed them. Questions came from everywhere. "Lucas, how does it feel to solve the Goldstone conjecture? Did you have special tutors? Is it true Professor Sterling accused you of fraud?" That last question cut through. Thomas Bennett's jaw tightened. "My son solved a problem through hard work and dedication," he said steadily. "That's all we have to say." They pushed through to the old Honda. In the car, his father spoke quietly. "This is your life now. People will want pieces of you. Decide what you're willing to give and what you keep for yourself." At Westfield Academy, chaos. News vans everywhere. Security guards blocking reporters. And by the entrance, surrounded by cameras, Professor Sterling. "This is a travesty of academic integrity," Sterling was saying, his voice carrying across the lawn. Lucas and his father stopped, still in the parking lot, watching. "I've reviewed the so-called solution more carefully, and I have serious questions about whether a 12-year-old could have produced this work without significant outside help. The mathematics community deserves a full investigation before we crown anyone a genius." Lucas felt his stomach drop. Sterling wasn't backing down. He was doubling down. "Dad, he's lying. You know I did this myself." "I know, son." "But he's scared. Scared men do desperate things." Thomas Bennett looked at the scene, then at his son. "You sure you want to go in there?" Lucas thought about turning around, going home, hiding. But then he thought about the problem itself, about those nights in the library when the numbers finally made sense, when the impossible became possible through nothing but logic and persistence. He'd earned this. He wasn't going to let Sterling take it away. "I'm sure." They walked toward the entrance. The reporters spotted Lucas immediately. The crowd surged. Sterling's expression when he saw Lucas was pure venom wrapped in a professional smile. "Ah, Mr. Bennett," Sterling said loudly, making sure every camera caught his words. "Perhaps you can explain to these journalists how a student with no advanced mathematical training, no special resources, and no documented gifted program enrollment managed to solve a problem that has stumped PhD mathematicians for 2 centuries. Lucas opened his mouth, but before he could speak, another voice cut through the crowd. "I can explain that, Victor." Dr. Brooks emerged from the main building. Ms. Ward beside him. But they weren't alone. Walking with them was a woman Lucas recognized from the photos Dr. Brooks had shown him yesterday. Professor Helen Chen from MIT, the expert who'd verified his solution. Professor Chen stepped forward, her presence commanding despite her small stature. She looked at the cameras, then at Sterling, then at Lucas with a warm smile. "My name is Professor Helen Chen. I've spent the last 16 hours reviewing Lucas Bennett's work in detail. Not just his final solution, but his notebooks, his process, his mathematical reasoning. And I can tell you without hesitation that this is the work of a genuine mathematical prodigy." She turned to face Sterling directly. "Professor Sterling, I understand your skepticism. When Dr. Brooks first told me about this, I was skeptical too. But the evidence is overwhelming. Lucas's approach is completely original. His notation is innovative. And yes, he did this alone. with no special resources beyond public library books and his own extraordinary mind. But the complexity, Sterling started. The complexity is exactly what proves its authenticity, Professor Chen interrupted. If Lucas had copied this from somewhere, the notation would match existing mathematical conventions. It doesn't. If someone had helped him, we'd see their influence in the methodology. We don't. This is the unmistakable signature of a young mind approaching an old problem with fresh eyes. She pulled out a folder and held it up. I have here letters from 3 other prominent mathematicians who've now reviewed Lucas's work. All 3 confirm what I'm telling you. This is real. This is legitimate. And it's extraordinary. The crowd of reporters erupted with questions. Sterling's face went through a series of expressions: anger, humiliation, desperation. Lucas watched the man who'd tried to destroy him realize that he'd lost. But Sterling wasn't finished. He stepped closer to the microphones, his voice rising. Then explain this. Explain how a boy from that neighborhood, from that background, with parents who never went to college, suddenly develops this level of mathematical genius. Where did it come from? How do we know? Careful, Victor. Dr. Brooks's voice was soft, but carried an unmistakable warning. Very careful what you say next. Sterling stopped, but the damage was partially done. Lucas felt the familiar sting, that background, that neighborhood. The polite way of saying he didn't belong, that his success must be a mistake or a fraud, because people like him weren't supposed to achieve things like this. Thomas Bennett stepped forward, placing himself between Sterling and his son. He was still in his factory uniform, grease stains on the sleeves, the name Tom stitched on the pocket. He looked like what he was, a working man who'd spent his life in factories and warehouses. But when he spoke, his voice carried a dignity that made Sterling's expensive suit look cheap. My son's genius didn't come from money or privilege, Professor Sterling. It came from the same place any genius comes from: hard work, determination, and a mind that refuses to accept that anything is impossible. He paused. And maybe it came from watching his father work double shifts so he could have a chance at schools like this. Maybe it came from knowing that people like you would look down on him and deciding to prove you all wrong. The reporters were silent. Cameras captured every word. Thomas Bennett turned to his son. I'm proud of you, Lucas. Your mother would be proud of you. Don't let anyone make you ashamed of where you came from or what you've accomplished. Lucas felt tears burning behind his eyes but refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of Sterling. Professor Chen stepped beside Lucas. I'd like to invite Lucas to visit MIT next week. We have several mathematicians who want to meet him, and I think he'd benefit from seeing our research facilities. She looked directly at Sterling. Genius appears in unexpected places, Professor Sterling. That's what makes it genius. It doesn't follow the rules. It doesn't care about zip codes or bank accounts. It just is. Dr. Brooks moved forward. I think that's enough for today. Lucas has classes to attend. The rest of you need to clear the campus. Now. The security guards began moving people back. Reporters shouted final questions. Sterling stood frozen, watching as Professor Chen put a protective hand on Lucas's shoulder, as Dr. Brooks led them toward the building, as his attempt to discredit Lucas collapsed completely. Inside the building, away from cameras, Lucas finally let himself breathe. His hands were shaking. His father pulled him into a hug. You did good, son. Your mother's watching, and she's so proud. Lucas nodded against his father's chest, not trusting his voice. Ms. Ward appeared with bottles of water. That was intense. How are you holding up? I don't know, Lucas admitted. I just wanted to solve a math problem. I didn't want all this. Unfortunately, Dr. Brooks said, achievement comes with attention, especially achievement like yours, but we'll help you navigate it, starting with getting you to class. Lucas looked up. Class? After all that? Life goes on, Mr. Bennett. You're still a student. You still have homework. Being a genius doesn't exempt you from algebra homework or history essays. Professor Chen laughed. He's right. Trust me, I've been dealing with this world for 30 years. The best thing you can do is stay grounded. Keep learning. Keep growing. Don't let the fame or the criticism define you. They walked Lucas to his first class. Students whispered inside, faces turning. Those who'd laughed yesterday now stared with awe and envy. Lucas hesitated at the doorway. One step at a time, his father said. Just like solving the problem. Lucas walked in. Every eye followed him. The teacher stopped mid-sentence. "Mr. Bennett, welcome. We're discussing the French Revolution. You've done the reading?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Tell us about the causes of social unrest in pre-revolutionary France." As Lucas answered, talking about wealth inequality, institutional injustice, the parallels were clear. A society where birth determined worth, where the powerful made rules, where someone from the wrong background wasn't supposed to succeed. But sometimes, someone did. Outside, Lucas saw Sterling crossing campus alone, reporters gone. The professor's shoulders slumped, confident stride replaced with defeat. Lucas felt unexpected sadness. He hadn't wanted to destroy Sterling, just wanted recognition for his achievement. But the world didn't work that way. In achievement and recognition, there were winners and losers. Sterling had chosen which one Lucas would be. He'd chosen wrong. Now both would live with the consequences. The week that followed felt like a dream or nightmare. Lucas's life became interviews, photo shoots, public appearances. Dr. Brooks hired a media consultant named Rebecca, who taught Lucas how to sit, smile, answer questions carefully. "You're not just Lucas Bennett anymore," Rebecca said. "You're a symbol, hope for underprivileged students, proof that genius can come from anywhere. People will project their dreams and prejudices onto you. Be ready for both." Lucas nodded, but he felt like he was drowning. The bright spot was the upcoming MIT trip. Professor Chen had arranged for Lucas to spend a weekend at the university. His father took unpaid time off work to accompany him. They flew to Boston on Friday morning. Lucas's first flight. His father sat by the window, hiding nervousness behind calm. They were out of their element, entering a world that felt like it belonged to other people. At Logan Airport, a driver waited with a sign reading Lucas Bennett, MIT. The car was nicer than anything Lucas had ever ridden in. Leather seats, bottled water, a screen showing stock prices that meant nothing to him. "This is temporary," his father said quietly as they rode through Boston. "Don't get used to luxury, son. This isn't our world. We're just visiting." But when they arrived at MIT, something shifted in Lucas. The campus wasn't like Westfield Academy's ostentatious display of wealth. It was beautiful in a different way, purpose-built for learning, for discovery, for pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. Students rushed between buildings with backpacks and coffee cups, arguing about equations, debating theories. This wasn't a place where people came to be wealthy. This was a place where people came to be brilliant. Professor Chen met them at the mathematics building, a modern structure of glass and steel. She was smaller than she'd appeared on television, more approachable. When she shook Lucas's hand, she held it for a moment longer than necessary. "I've been thinking about your solution all week," she said. "There are implications you probably haven't even considered yet. Come on, I want to show you something." She led them through corridors lined with photographs of Nobel laureates and Fields Medal winners, past classrooms where graduate students filled blackboards with complex equations, to a corner office with a view of the Charles River. "This was my mentor's office," Professor Chen said. "Professor David Kellerman. He spent 40 years working on the Goldstone conjecture. It became his obsession, his white whale. He died 5 years ago, convinced he'd failed." She turned to Lucas. "I called his daughter yesterday, told her what you'd accomplished. She cried, said her father would have been thrilled to know someone finally solved it." Lucas felt the weight of that. He'd thought of the conjecture as a puzzle, a challenge. He hadn't thought about all the lives it had touched, all the brilliant minds that had wrestled with it and lost. "How old were you when you started working on it?" Professor Chen asked. "I was 12 when I found the problem. I solved it 3 months later." 3 months? Professor Chen shook her head. "Do you understand how remarkable that is? I worked on this problem for 6 years. 6 years of my life, and I never got close to what you did in 3 months. Some people would find that humbling. Others would find it threatening. Like Professor Sterling," Lucas said quietly. "Like Professor Sterling," she agreed. "But you need to understand something, Lucas. Sterling isn't the last person who's going to react badly to your success. The academic world can be territorial, competitive. When someone young, especially someone from an unexpected background, achieves something extraordinary, it challenges the established order. Some people will celebrate you. Others will spend years trying to prove you wrong or diminish your achievement." Thomas Bennett had been quiet. but now he spoke up. "What are you telling my son? That he should expect more attacks?" "I'm telling him the truth," Professor Chen said gently. "Success at this level comes with a target on your back. But I'm also telling him that he has allies, people who will defend his work, mentor him, help him navigate this world." She looked at Lucas. "If you want those allies, that is." Over the next 2 days, Lucas met those potential allies. Dr. Raymond Foster, who specialized in abstract algebra, and spent 3 hours walking Lucas through related problems, testing his reasoning, pushing his thinking. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, whose work on number theory had won her international recognition, and who told Lucas stories about facing discrimination as a woman in mathematics. Dr. Marcus Webb, who'd grown up in Detroit, the first in his family to go to college, who understood what it meant to be brilliant in a world that expected you to fail. They didn't treat Lucas like a celebrity or a curiosity. They treated him like a colleague, a young colleague, but a colleague nonetheless. They challenged his thinking, questioned his assumptions, pushed him to articulate not just what he'd discovered, but why it mattered. On Saturday night, Professor Chen hosted dinner at her home. 20 mathematicians, all wanting to meet the 12-year-old who'd solved the impossible. Lucas sat at the table, his father beside him, listening to conversations ranging from topology to quantum mechanics to philosophy of mathematics. These people loved numbers and patterns with an intensity Lucas recognized in himself. "Tell me, Lucas," Dr. Foster said during dessert, "what are you working on now? What's next?" The table fell quiet. Everyone turned to Lucas. He felt his father's hand on his shoulder. "I don't know yet," Lucas admitted. "I've been so focused on defending what I already did that I haven't thought about what comes next." "That's honest," Dr. Tanaka said. "Too many young prodigies feel pressured to immediately produce another miracle. But mathematics isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. Though if you want a suggestion, Dr. Webb said with a smile, there's this little problem involving prime number distribution that's been bothering mathematicians for about 150 years. Laughter and groans erupted. Lucas found himself smiling, really smiling for the first time in days. After dinner, Professor Chen walked Lucas and his father through her garden. The September evening was cool, the stars visible despite the city lights. "I want to make you an offer," Professor Chen said. "When you're ready, when you finish high school, or earlier if you want, I'd like you to come to MIT as my research assistant. Full scholarship, stipend for living expenses, access to resources that will let you pursue whatever mathematical questions interest you." Lucas stopped walking. "I'm 12. I know. That's why I said when you're ready. But I want you to know the offer is there. You belong here, Lucas. Not at some prep school where people care more about prestige than understanding. Here, with people who love mathematics the way you do." Thomas Bennett cleared his throat. "That's very generous, Professor. But Lucas is still a child. He needs more than just mathematics in his life." "I agree completely," Professor Chen said, "which is why I'm not pushing him to come now. But Mr. Bennett, I've been in academia for 30 years. I've seen hundreds of talented students. Thousands, maybe. Lucas isn't just talented. He has something special, a way of seeing patterns, of approaching problems from unexpected angles. That kind of mind needs nurturing, challenging, protecting. Protecting from what? Lucas's father asked. Professor Chen looked back toward her house, where through the windows they could see the other mathematicians still talking, gesturing, drawing diagrams on napkins, from people who will try to use him, from institutions that will see him as a commodity rather than a person, from the pressure to constantly prove himself, from the isolation that comes with being different. She paused. And from himself. "Brilliant people can be their own worst enemies, Mr. Bennett. They set impossible standards, burn themselves out, lose sight of why they started loving what they do in the first place." They walked in silence for a moment. Then Lucas asked the question that had been bothering him since the dinner. "Do you think I'll do it again? Solve something important?" Professor Chen stopped and turned to face him. "Honestly, I don't know. The Goldstone conjecture might be the greatest thing you ever accomplish, or it might be the first of many breakthroughs. But here's what I know for certain. Whether you solve another major problem, or spend the rest of your life doing solid, incremental work that advances the field in small ways, You've already made a contribution that will echo through mathematics for generations. You can't unsee what you saw. You can't undo what you proved. That's yours forever. Sunday morning came too quickly. As they prepared to leave for the airport, Dr. Foster pulled Lucas aside. "I wanted to give you something," he said, handing Lucas a worn leather journal. "This belonged to my mentor. He gave it to me when I was about your age. Well, a bit older, but close enough. It's full of unsolved problems, half-formed ideas, questions that no one has answers to yet. Some of them are probably impossible. Some might have solutions we just haven't found. I think you should have it now." Lucas opened the journal carefully. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, diagrams, equations, decades of mathematical thinking captured in ink and paper. "Why me?" Lucas asked. "Because you see possibilities where others see walls," Dr. Foster replied. "And because the person who gave this to me said something I've never forgotten. Mathematics isn't about being smarter than everyone else. It's about being curious enough to ask questions and stubborn enough to keep looking for answers even when everyone says there aren't any." The flight home was quiet. Lucas sat with the journal in his lap, flipping through pages of problems that had stumped brilliant minds. His father dozed beside him, exhausted from a weekend of trying to understand conversations that were beyond him, but supporting his son anyway. Lucas thought about Professor Chen's offer, about MIT, about a future where he could spend his days doing what he loved, surrounded by people who understood the beauty of a perfect proof. But he also thought about Westfield Academy, about Ms. Ward, who'd defended him when she didn't have to, about the students who'd started looking at him differently, not just the ones who were jealous, but the ones who'd approached him quietly to say they were struggling with math. Could he help them understand? The plane descended into their home city. Through the window, Lucas could see the familiar skyline, not Boston's historic elegance, but the industrial reality of a working-class city. Somewhere down there was their small apartment, the library where he'd found the conjecture, the neighborhood where people knew him as Tom Bennett's kid, not as a mathematical genius. "Dad?" Lucas said as they waited for baggage claim. "Yes, son? Do you think I'm going to change, become someone different?" Thomas Bennett looked at his son for a long moment. "I think you're going to grow, learn, see more of the world, meet more people, have more experiences, and yeah, that'll change you." He put his hand on Lucas's shoulder. "But here's what I know about you, Lucas. You've got your mother's brain and your mother's heart. She was the smartest person I ever met, and she was also the kindest. She never forgot where she came from, never stopped caring about people who had less than she did. As long as you hold on to that, as long as you remember that being brilliant doesn't make you better than anyone else, just different, you'll be fine." They collected their single shared suitcase and headed for the exit. Outside, the September afternoon was hot and humid, nothing like Boston's autumn cool. A bus would take them most of the way home. They'd walk the last few blocks to save the fare. As they rode the bus through familiar streets, Lucas saw his city with new eyes. The corner store where he bought notebooks, the park where he'd sometimes study on nice days, the people waiting at bus stops, coming home from work or heading out for night shifts. This was his world. These were his people. He thought about the mathematicians he'd met at MIT, their comfortable lives, their fascinating conversations, their freedom to pursue ideas wherever they led. He wanted that, but he also wanted to remember the library where it had all started, the public space that had given a poor kid access to centuries of human knowledge for free. His father was right. He was going to change. The world was watching now, waiting to see what the 12-year-old genius would do next. Colleges were already reaching out. Media outlets wanted interviews. Other mathematicians were analyzing his proof, building on his work, taking his solution to the Goldstone conjecture in new directions. But sitting on that bus, holding a journal full of unsolved problems, riding through the neighborhood that had shaped him, Lucas made a promise to himself. He would grow. He would learn. He would pursue mathematics with everything he had, but he wouldn't forget. He wouldn't forget the library. He wouldn't forget Miss Ward's kindness or Dr. Brooks's support. He wouldn't forget his father's sacrifice or his mother's memory, and he definitely wouldn't forget what it felt like to be underestimated, to have people look at him and see only his zip code, only his second-hand clothes, only what he wasn't instead of what he could be, because that memory, that sting, was fuel. fuel for every problem he'd solve, every barrier he'd break. Every time someone said something was impossible, the world was watching. And Lucas Bennett was just getting started. 6 months later, Lucas Bennett stood in the same lecture hall where it had all begun. But this time, he wasn't in the back row. He stood at the front, facing an auditorium packed with students, faculty, reporters who'd traveled from across the country. The Stanford Institute of Mathematics had invited him to present his solution to the Goldstone conjecture. Not defend it, present it, as the legitimate world-changing breakthrough it was. Lucas adjusted the microphone, hands steadier than that day in Stirling's class. He'd learned a lot in 6 months: how to handle pressure, how to ignore doubters, how to carry expectations' weight without being crushed. His father sat in the third row, another day off work. Beside him, Ms. Ward, who'd driven 4 hours. Dr. Brooks occupied a seat near the back, expression proud. And front row, Professor Helen Chen smiled encouragingly. But the seat that mattered most was empty. Row 7, aisle seat, where Professor Victor Stirling would have sat if he'd accepted the invitation. He hadn't. Stirling had resigned from Westfield Academy 2 months after Lucas's solution was verified. The official statement cited personal reasons. But everyone knew the truth. He'd been given a choice: resign with dignity or face disciplinary action. Lucas had felt conflicting emotions. Relief, certainly. But also unexpected sadness for a brilliant man who'd let pride destroy his career. "Good afternoon," Lucas began, his voice carrying clearly through the speakers. 6 months ago, I stood in front of a classroom and claimed I'd solved a problem that had defeated mathematicians for 2 centuries. Half the people in that room laughed. The other half thought I was delusional or dishonest. A ripple of knowing laughter moved through the audience. Today, I'm not here to prove I was right. Smarter people than me have already done that. I'm here to tell you how a 12-year-old kid with a library card and too much determination did something everyone said was impossible, because the how matters just as much as the what. For the next hour, Lucas walked them through his journey. Not just the mathematics, though he explained every transformation, but the human story, the cold library nights, the coffee-stained notebooks, the moments of frustration, the 2 a.m. breakthrough when everything clicked. He talked about failure, about hundreds of approaches that didn't work, because genius wasn't about never being wrong. It was about being wrong 1,000 times and still trying 1,001. The audience was silent, completely absorbed. Even reporters had stopped taking notes. "There's something I need to address," Lucas said, his tone shifting. "A lot of people have asked about Professor Stirling. Some expect me to settle scores." He paused, looking at the empty seat in row 7. "But here's what I've learned. Hurt people. Hurt people. Professor Stirling spent his career working on this problem. Decades dedicated to something he never solved. Then a kid from a poor neighborhood walks in and solves it in 3 months. That had to hurt." Lucas saw his father nodding. "I'm not excusing what he did. He was wrong to accuse me of fraud, wrong to try destroying my reputation. But I'm not going to let his actions define my story. My story isn't about Professor Stirling. It's about every kid who's been told they're not smart enough, not the right kind of person to achieve great things." The applause started softly, then built into something thunderous. Lucas waited for it to fade. "I want to tell you about someone," he continued, pulling out a photograph. On the screen behind him, an image appeared. A woman in surgical scrubs, smiling at the camera. "This is my mother, Dr. Sarah Bennett. She grew up in the same neighborhood I did. Her parents were immigrants who worked in factories. She went to public schools that didn't have enough textbooks. But she had something that money couldn't buy. She had curiosity and determination." Lucas's voice thickened slightly. "She became a surgeon. She saved lives. And she never forgot where she came from. Even when she got successful, even when she could have moved to a wealthy neighborhood and sent me to expensive schools, she chose to stay in our community. She said, 'Lucas, if everyone who succeeds leaves, who's going to show the kids that success is possible?'" He took a breath. "She died when I was 8. Brain aneurysm. Sudden. No warning. One day she was there, and the next day she wasn't. And I was so angry. Angry at the world for taking her. Angry that someone so brilliant, so kind, could just disappear." The lecture hall was absolutely silent. But then I found mathematics, Real mathematics, not just what they teach in school. And I discovered that in math, things that seem impossible are just problems we haven't solved yet. That there are always answers if you're willing to look hard enough. And I think I started working on the Goldstone conjecture because I wanted to prove that my mother was right. That kids like us can do impossible things. Lucas looked directly at the camera recording the lecture. So if you're watching this from a small apartment in a neighborhood people look down on, if you're studying in a public library because it's warmer than home, if someone has ever told you that people like you don't become scientists or mathematicians or doctors, this is for you. You can do this. Not because you're special, but because brilliance doesn't care about your address or your bank account or what people expect from you. The applause was deafening now. Lucas saw his father wiping his eyes. Ms. Ward was openly crying. Even Professor Chen looked emotional. But Lucas wasn't finished. Before I conclude, I want to do something. Ms. Ward, could you come up here, please? Ms. Ward looked startled, but made her way to the stage. Lucas turned to face her. Ms. Ward, you were the first teacher at Westfield Academy who didn't look at my scholarship status or my zip code and make assumptions about what I could achieve. When Professor Sterling was trying to destroy my future, you stood up for me. You risked your career to defend a 12-year-old student you barely knew. Why? Ms. Ward's voice was soft but carried through the microphone. Because it was the right thing to do. Because I became a teacher to help students reach their potential, not to protect the egos of tenured professors. Lucas nodded. Professor Chen and the Stanford Institute have established something called the Sarah Bennett Scholarship Fund. It's going to provide full scholarships to mathematically gifted students from underserved communities. Students who have the ability, but not the resources. Students like me. Students like my mother was. He turned to Ms. Ward. And we'd like you to head the selection committee, to use your gift for seeing potential in unexpected places to find the next generation of mathematicians who deserve a chance. Ms. Xiam. Ward covered her mouth with her hand, tears streaming down her face. Yes, absolutely. The auditorium erupted. People were on their feet, clapping, cheering. Lucas hugged Ms. Ward and she whispered in his ear, Your mother would be so proud. As Ms. Ward returned to her seat, Lucas faced the audience one final time. I'm going to end with something Professor Chen told me. She said the Goldstone conjecture might be the greatest thing I ever accomplish. Or just the beginning. Honestly, I don't know which. I might solve 100 more problems. I might never solve another. But I'll keep asking questions. Keep challenging assumptions. Keep believing that impossible is just another word for not solved yet. He glanced at the empty seat, then back at the audience. And I hope somewhere, there's another 12-year-old kid in a library right now, looking at a problem everyone says can't be solved. I hope they're stubborn enough to try anyway. I hope they're brave enough to raise their hand even when people might laugh. Because that's how we change the world. One impossible problem at a time. Lucas stepped back from the microphone. The applause was overwhelming, a wave of sound that seemed to shake the building. But he barely heard it. He was looking at his father, who was standing now, clapping with tears running down his face. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and in that moment, no words were needed. Thomas Bennett had worked double shifts in a factory, so his son could have opportunities he never had. He'd supported Lucas through mockery, through accusations, through moments when giving up would have been easier. He'd believed in his son when the world didn't, and his son had proven him right. 3 hours later, after presentations, interviews, countless handshakes, Lucas found himself alone in the mathematics building's library. Smaller than MIT's, but beautiful, floor-to-ceiling books, the quiet that only exists in spaces dedicated to thinking. He pulled out the journal Dr. Foster had given him. 6 months, barely looked at it, too busy defending his first achievement. But now he opened to the first page, an unsolved problem in number theory, something about prime distributions that had puzzled mathematicians for over a century. Lucas smiled. It looked impossible. Perfect. He pulled out a notebook. Not a cheap composition book anymore, but proper leather from Professor Chen, and began to write. Not to prove anything. Not because the world was watching, but because he was curious. Because the numbers whispered questions. Because solving impossible problems was who he was. Behind him, the library door opened. He didn't look up. Lucas Bennett? He turned. A young woman stood there, maybe 16, clutching a folder. She looked nervous, wearing clothes chosen for importance but didn't quite fit right. Yes? I'm Maria Torres, from East Los Angeles. I saw your presentation today, the live stream. I couldn't afford to come in person. She took a breath. I've been working on a problem. A professor said it was unsolvable, that I was wasting my time. But after watching you, I thought maybe you could look at it. Lucas saw himself in her eyes. Hope mixed with fear. Determination wrapped in uncertainty. Brilliance waiting to be recognized. He closed his journal and smiled. Show me. Maria opened her folder with shaking hands, pulling out pages covered in equations. As Lucas looked at her work, saw the innovative thinking, the creative approaches, the raw talent, he realized something profound. This was what his mother meant. This was why she stayed in their neighborhood. This was the real victory. Not solving the Goldstone conjecture, but being the person he'd needed when he was starting out. Being the voice that said, your ideas matter instead of that's impossible. This is brilliant, Lucas said honestly, pointing to one of Maria's transformations. This approach here, I've never seen anyone think about the problem from this angle. Have you considered taking it further by... As they worked together, two young mathematicians separated by age and experience, but united by curiosity, Lucas felt something click into place. Not a mathematical insight this time, but something more important. Purpose. He'd spent 6 months being the boy who solved the impossible problem. Now he could be something better. The person who helped others believe they could solve impossible problems too. Outside the library windows, the California evening settled over the campus. Somewhere out there, in cities and towns across the world, other kids sat in libraries, bent over problems everyone said couldn't be solved. Kids who'd been told they weren't smart enough, weren't the right type, didn't have what it took. Lucas hoped they were stubborn enough to try anyway. He hoped they were brave enough to raise their hands. He hoped they understood that impossible was just another word for not solved yet, because the world needed their brilliance, their fresh perspectives, their refusal to accept limitations. The world needed them to prove everyone wrong, just like Lucas Bennett had, just like he would again and again and again, because that's what mathematicians do. They see walls and they find doors. They hear impossible and they hear not yet. They face problems that have defeated the greatest minds in history, and they ask one simple question. But what if? What if the answer exists, waiting to be found? What if I'm the one who finds it? What if everything they said was impossible isn't? Those 3 words, what if, had changed Lucas's life. And as he worked with Maria Torres on her problem, watching her eyes light up as she saw possibilities she'd missed before, he knew those same 3 words would change lives for generations to come. The boy who couldn't solve it had become the boy who did. And now he was becoming something even better. The person who helped others believe they could too. That was the real victory. That was the story that mattered. That was the impossible thing worth doing.